We'll discuss one of the most eclectic collections of ships in Star Wars history as we discuss the Maw Irregular Fleet in today's video. Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another upload. Before we begin, today's video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Guess what though? They're not going to watch the promo. They asked us to start a channel. We did. My degenerate gaming friend Charlie is running it. I actually did the last video though because I've low-key got addicted to the game. A link to it down in the description. If you're not interested, no worries. If you are, or you really want to help us out, click the link or use the promo code. But today, as mentioned in the introduction, we are discussing the Maw Irregular Fleet. Now, either fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you like to consume lore videos, before I describe the ships of the fleet and why they were so strange, we need to get through quite a bit of backstory. But the journey, trust me for this one, is as interesting as the destination. For full context, you need to understand both the character of Natassi Dalla and the circumstances leading up to the Battle of Fondor in the Second Galactic Civil War. Let's start with the story of Natassi Dalla. And as an aside, I said so many times that Star Wars YouTube has only covered just a fraction of the lore of the expanded universe. Dalla is a great example of this. She's a major Imperial character, first appearing in the Jedi Academy trilogy by Kevin J. Anderson. We're not going to cover this today, but she would later rise all the way to Chief of State of the Galactic Alliance, and there are like 3 or 4 videos, none really recent on her. So for my budding Star Wars Legends YouTubers, there's still room for you. Anyway, the short version is Dalla's story starts, at least as far as we're concerned, at the Maw installation. She's placed there by Grand Moff Tarkin to supervise and protect advanced Imperial research projects, including the Sun Crusher. During the Jedi Academy trilogy, this facility would be discovered, and Dalla, who had been incommunicado, would, after learning the fate of the Emperor and the fractured state of the Empire, set off on a campaign of her own, including an attack on Mon Calamari. Dalla would return for the Callista trilogy of novels. The Empire had further eroded at that point, so Dalla sets up a meeting of Imperial Remnant leaders at Toss Beacon, and after determining that there was no way they could work together, she assassinates them and essentially takes the forces for her own. Dalla again starts raiding planets across the galaxy, culminating in an attack on Yavin 4. This is a complete disaster. I've covered it in a battle breakdown, but Dalla loses her superstar destroyer, the Nighthammer. Well, the rest of the fleet, including the Crimson Command and a number of Star Destroyers, are dispersed through the power of the Force. So, massive L for Dalla. At this point, she gives up control of the somewhat unified Imperial Remnant to Gilad Pellaeon, and except for a brief mention in the subsequent novel, she's not seen again until late in the Legacy of the Force series, over a decade later, in real time. In universe, Dalla's nonsense takes place about a decade into the post-Endor era, i.e. 13 or so years after the Battle of Yavin. To get to the topic of today's video, however, we need to skip way far ahead, and this is where I'll explain the Second Galactic Civil War and the events leading to the Battle of Fondor, or more specifically, the Second Battle of Fondor. I've covered the early stages of the Second Galactic Civil War recently on this channel, so I won't go into full detail, but essentially, 40 years after the Battle of Yavin, a post-Yuuzhan Vong invasion galaxy is once again in the midst of another civil war. Honestly, the circumstances are not totally dissimilar from the Clone Wars. The Galactic Alliance, the successor state to the New Republic, to put it simply, has attempted to increase control and also taxation on powerful systems, leading to a revolt known as the Confederacy, led by powerful star systems like Corellia and Fondor. The GA is an interesting faction because while it represents, yes, the successor state to the New Republic, before the Second Galactic Civil War, it also included the Imperial Remnant and other smaller factions like the Hapes Consortium. At the heart of the Second Galactic Civil War is Jacen Solo, son of Han and Leia, twin to Jaina Solo. He occupies sort of a mix of Vader and Palpatine. He falls to the dark side, taking the moniker Darth Caedus, while also serving as Chief of State and essentially Fleet Admiral Admiral of the GA. As he falls further into his Sith ways, his tactics and strategy becomes more esoteric. He relies on advanced Sith battle meditation, and the war rapidly spirals out of control. Former Imperial Gilad Pellaeon, now in his 90s, yes, the same Pellaeon who served as Captain to Thrawn and also led the unified Imperial Remnant after Dalla, had previously been Supreme Commander of the Galactic Alliance's military, but as Jacen got out of hand, he retired and the Empire formally separates themselves from the Alliance. Anyway, in a roundabout way, this now brings us to the Second Battle of Fondor. By this point in the war, and by the way, this takes place in Book 8 of Legacy of the Force, Caedus's Galactic Alliance and the Confederacy have essentially fought each other to a standstill. Looking to tip the scales, Caedus reaches out to Pellaeon and the Imperial Remnant and asks for a partnership. He promises control of several worlds, including Bilbringi, in exchange for their support at the Battle of Fondor and subsequently. Pellaeon agrees, although he recognizes the danger of Jacen Solo, and so calls to an old friend for backup. He calls Natasi Dalla, who at this point had been more or less out of the public consciousness for 30 years, and she promises to be there at Fondor if needed. Dalla also reaches out to the Mandalorians, who pledge further support. The Battle of Fondor is, to put it extremely lightly, a complete shit show. At this point, Jacen Solo is not sole Chief of State, rather, he's sharing the role with Mon Calamari Admiral Cha Niathal. At Fondor, despite a leak of information outlining the initial Alliance attack, Jacen Solo, through advanced force powers, is able to take down Fondor's planetary shield and bombard the capital city. Fondor looks to surrender, however, Jacen, in his Sith rage, seeks to make an example out of the planet. On the other hand, Cha Niathal, who was also at the battle and commanding a significant portion of the Alliance forces, accepts the surrender, leading to a standoff. Caedus, Jacen, refuses to accept the surrender, and Alliance ships are forced to side with either Niathal or Jacen Solo. Pellaeon and the Imperial Remnant choose to side with Niathal. However, after the order is made, Pellaeon is assassinated on the bridge of his new Star Destroyer, the Bloodfin, by Caedus' apprentice Tahiri Vela. At this point, the Imperial Remnant forces also lose cohesion, and upon the assassination of Pellaeon, Dalla, alongside her Mandalorian supporters, jump to the battle. This is where we get, I guess, the topic of today's video, the Maw Irregular Fleet. Dalla has, over 30 years or so, come up with an eclectic mix of ships. One thing that's interesting is that Legacy of the Force, unlike many post-Endor novels, was written after the prequels. So when they're naming off random ships that appear in the fleet, we hear, for example, that it has a Venator-class Star Destroyer, as well as an Acclamator. We don't get every specific, but the fleet is essentially portrayed as a bunch of museum ships, perhaps none more so than its flagship, the Chimera, the Imperial II Star Destroyer used by Grand Admiral Thrawn. As you can imagine, the mere appearance of that ship at the battle has a real morale effect on Imperial officers present. Additional ships named explicitly in Legacy of the Force include a Victory-class Star Destroyer, Crusader-class corvettes, Assassin corvettes, and, to me, most interestingly, Republic-class cruisers. Republic-class cruiser is sort of a weird designator, whether it's a Republic Star Destroyer or a Mon Calamari cruiser, even a Nebula, who knows. Either way, what was unique about this scrap heap was not only its strange collection of ships, but also their weaponry. At least some vessels in the Maw Irregular Fleet were outfitted with metal crystal phase shifters. This is a type of weaponry which essentially ignores a vessel's shields, destroying the material of the ship on an atomic level. The weapons were very, very rare, and not every ship used them. However, that was almost an advantage. They were seemingly randomly dispersed, so you never knew whether the vessel would have conventional weaponry or the metal crystal phase shifters. Anyway, as the battle progressed, much of the Imperial Remnant joined with Jacen Solo, although the Bloodfin itself, former flagship of the Imperial Fleet, was captured and presented to Dalla, who added it to the Maw Irregular Fleet, and facing an unknown but clearly dangerous enemy, Jacen Solo was forced to retreat to Coruscant. The other portion of the GA forces, led by Admiral Niathal, form a government in exile, leading to the final novel, Legacy of the Force Invincible, where we see the Galactic Alliance, led by Caedus, face off against the Confederacy, the Galactic Alliance in exile, and of course, the Jedi. Anyway, that is all from now. quite a crazy story. Hopefully you enjoyed it. That's all I've got on the Maw Irregular Fleet. They do return for the final novel of the series, and later, Dahl becomes Chief of State, and she does bring them in Fate of the Jedi, which, that's wild. We'll have to talk about that later. I'm currently, if you can't tell, doing a reread of Legacy of the Force, and we're about to cover Book 9. By the way, check out my podcast, Tapcalf Transmissions, if you want to hear me yap about these novels in greater details with my friend Corey. But that's all for now. See you next time, and may the Force be with you.